Okay, everybody, so Douglas Finance Committee coming to order December 12th at 7 PM, and we'll go around the table and acknowledge ourselves, starting with Howard.
Good evening, Howard D'Amico, Finance Committee.
Sandy Kuipers.
Dick Vandenberg
Carol Gogolinsky.
Michael Huddock.
and Ryan, you're here, right?
Ryan Hogan.
Okay, so Lynn Mazzulli's absent with notice, and Heather, I haven't heard from her, but, so she may be coming up, so. All right, Matt, you have the floor. We'd like to get a review from you on just where we are currently, and then also some themes we should have in mind as we work on the budget process once the new year comes. So why don't you approach the table, please?
That's a short agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well,
Greetings.
heavy lifting starts in the new year, I think.
Yeah. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving and looking forward to the holiday season. Travel safe. If you're going to go to the I-195 westbound, don't do it. So my commute's going from bad to worse.
Yeah.
We are in the process now of negotiating contracts with police and fire unions. And on the school side, we'll be negotiating 3 contracts this year. Paraprofessionals, the cafeteria staff, and the custodial staff. So that's 5 of our 6 contracts. And we also have leadership contracts. We just finished with the fire chief. We have police chief, police lieutenant, and the fire assistant chief, all up. So the multiplicity of contracts that we have force fiscal analysis early in the process this year, so because we simply cannot negotiate with either unions or professional staff without some idea of what our leash looks like and how long it is. So frankly, sitting here, other than some tidying up details, I could submit a budget as early as tomorrow night and be perfectly happy with the product representing various policy initiatives. I would prefer not to, because I don't want to disclose to various collective bargaining units what I may have set aside and allocated as potential budget. It's just not good form to either foreclose negotiation options or to cut the talks short. So I would like to hold them back, but I have a great many key assumptions to disclose about what the budget's going to look like this year. And I'll take a step back and step into abstraction just for a couple of minutes. This is the year that we anticipate that the new growth generated by the warehouse at Gilboa Street, the cubes at Gilboa, will become part of the tax roll. And quite obviously, I think, we have discussed this with the principal assessor as the project has progressed to make sure that that is a valid assumption, because it's a large sum of money. And we are, of course, going to go out there at the last possible minute before the deadline to close the assessment for the year. And we feel, frankly, that the building will either be completely closed in or so close to being completely closed in that we will recognize the assessed value of the shell of the building in new growth. At the point that I'm at right now, in order to remain conservative, that is the only value for new growth that I'm putting into the budget forecast. So I'm not forecasting any residential growth at all, which, as you know, isn't true. That's not going to work out that way. We have quite a fair number of building permits out there. And any number of new homes have already been completed this tax year. But just to try to keep us focused on not spending through, we'll just be very conservative with our revenue assumptions. So we always start on the revenue side, and the revenue assumptions that are pushing me at the moment is that we will have new growth of 1.15 million in fiscal '25, which we will absorb into the levy. No additional commercial or industrial jumbo-sized projects are in the model at this time, so we are not going to plan staff development or asset development based on future projects which are being explored and maybe in the permitting process, but have not yet actually come in for site plan review or anything remotely resembling a final commitment.
Can I interrupt you a minute?
Sure.
So the talk with the assessors, when will that be? Is that February or is that October?
The last possible moment is right before January 1st.
Oh, okay. So the next 2 weeks then?
Yep, it's like a field trip. Everybody goes out, counts the number of voting bays, everything that needs to be counted
Okay.
to do that assessment.
Now, they assess it then, but when do they actually pay taxes on it?
So it'll be in fiscal '25
But
as new growth.
what are you talking about? What dates are we talking? Fiscal 20?
I don't send out the bills, so you would,
Well, the prelims are based upon the previous fiscal year, so it catches up with you. Like now, the actual bills will be going out right after Christmas.
Yep.
Okay.
And so they get adjusted in the February and the May payments.
They'll go out after Christmas, but they won't get taxed on what was on there at December 31st, will they? Will that be what they're
No.
using for their assessment? No.
No, so it's the
No.
next
won't-
fiscal.
they won't
it's the next fiscal, this is fiscal '25.
Right.
So
July 1.
which begins when?
August and November.
Well, August,
July
November
of
is based
'24
on
or July of
So August and
25?
November
July of
based on
24.
what you say right now.
correct, they're based on
July,
the
I thought, yeah.
one quarter of this fiscal year.
Right,
The
so-
bills that are going out in February.
So we won't actually see cash collections until December, or excuse me,
February.
2025.
Right.
Right.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
before we get money in on it would be February
Right.
2025? Okay.
Right, because like Gene's saying,
Yeah.
the initial assessment would be based upon this year's, which is zero at the moment.
Right.
So their August/November bills
Right.
will be zero. Then if we go out in December and do an evaluation, that would get incorporated into the catch-up bills or
Right.
the
When the
Q3, Q4
actuals
bills.
go out.
Right.
Yep.
For actuals, yeah. Okay.
There's always a lag
Yeah, right.
with a new building.
I figured,
And
I'm
the
just
fiscal
figuring
year
out where
is
the lag
July
was.
1, correct?
Correct.
But the tax revenue won't be coming in till
The
February.
following February.
2025.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless they decide to prepay.
I don't think
Well,
so.
they must be assessed on something.
What's that?
They must be assessed on something, the land and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some billing, but
Yeah, they're not with this impact. So that's building alone. That's not the transfer of the property or that's already been taken in.
Okay.
Well, your 1.15 is based, I think from what you just said, entirely on this one event and based on its December 31, 2023 look at.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is another reason to hold back the actual spreadsheet, right? So if the assessor comes back and says, yeah, no,
Yeah.
right, and then we'll have to start over from scratch. But we've been watching this like a hawk for a very long time, so we're pretty sure we got the right dates.
Is there any way they could challenge the assessment?
No,
No.
there are enough exemplars of buildings of this size all around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and this potential value
Yeah.
that generates this much revenue is something that the principal assessor has established through research, talking to the other towns that have valued almost carbon footprint of the exact copied footprint of this building. So,
Matt,
yeah.
if I may, just quickly. So theoretically, December 31, 2024, you'll go out and look at a completely finished, hopefully operating full project, and that will be when you'll look for fiscal year '26 to capture 100% of what we expect annually to be revenue.
Yeah, so again, I'm being really conservative with this. So I'm assuming for the rest of the forecast period in the model, that the building's never occupied and it sits there as a shell.
Okay,
Right.
fair enough.
But you are
Got it,
you are
got it, got
correct.
it. Nope.
But no, it's a good point, and I want to kind of elaborate on that, because depending on who the tenant is, there may actually be a substantial increase in value in fiscal
Eventually,
'26.
right, yeah.
And we see this playing out with the other warehouse on the other side of 146, which presently is vacant, and it is going to be occupied by one of the 5 largest companies in the world, a Fortune 5 company, that is going to actually spend 2 times as much on the robots
Yeah, sure.
as they have spent on the building.
Got it.
So that's pretty spectacular personal property tax impact, mostly for the towns of Sutton and Uxbridge, but we'll get a piece of that as well.
7% of a lot is still a lot, right?
Correct. And 7% of the structure, just remember, it's 13% of everything.
Okay,
I like that number better.
yeah.
Because it's a parking lot, you're going to put stuff in that parking lot, that might have plates on it, stuff like that. We also, though, continue to assume, because we're being so conservative about what we'll take in from this project, that the levy will continue to increase at the statutory maximum of 2.5% year over year throughout the 3-year forecast period. That local receipts would grow at 2% year over year. Again, that is a conservative revenue estimate. So that is the revenue side. And what,
Can I ask?
yep,
You used a term before, I thought you used something like, "will consume that." I don't think that was the word, "into the levy." Subsume.
I think subsume was what it is.
Subsume it into the levy. But that doesn't mean the 1.15 will go in to reduce the tax rate, which,
We're adding it to the levy.
it's on top of the
Yeah.
other revenues you just project. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
But that doesn't mean we'll go through the full amount as spending, permanent spending. So
Yeah.
the strategy the town used during my tenure here with the override was the town did in fact spend all of the money raised from the override, but we spent it on capital, which didn't necessarily have to be repeated the following year. So the operating budget did grow and absorbed some of the override, but the rest was dedicated towards capital, and that allowed the town to no longer spend free cash to balance the budget, and that one particular year wasn't used for capital either. So we accrued a full year of free cash that we were able to build on, that we've been building on ever since. And this is a positive cycle for a municipal government to be in. So you're not using free cash for operating, you have these economic development bumps. So what I'd like to hold back in terms of money that would be spent on a one-time expense are those proceeds necessary to purchase real estate and possibly improve it to the point where it's site developable for a new highway barn. So I don't want to roll the purchase of real estate into the bonding for this project. Would like to buy it cash. That's the first year of this money being in the budget as new revenue. That will give you some headroom for your operating and capital budgets to continue to grow in future years without necessarily making a big drawdown on free cash. Are there any questions about that system or that way of thinking?
So Matt, at the top, you mentioned all the contracts that are going to be negotiated. Do those all go on simultaneously, all that negotiating, or is it like every 3 weeks there's a new, I mean, how do you get all that done by the town meeting?
We are fortunate that both police and fire invited us to the table early, so this is part of the labor negotiations dynamic. When the union says, well, we're coming up to the end of our contract, let's sit down and bargain a follow-on agreement, we have a time frame. We have to respond in a timely fashion to that invitation. And based on the analysis that I'll go through in a second, we were prepared to answer that right away, get to brass tacks with numbers, so that we could get moving. We have not been invited to the table by any of the unions representing any school employees, although we anticipate, since their contracts are expiring, that we will hear from them. We have the teachers union that represents the paras, and the Teamsters represent cafeteria and custodians.
Matt,
Yeah.
you mentioned the highway barn. Are there meetings we can listen to know what plans are in the making for the highway barn?
Yes and no. There's a very good Building Facilities Committee meeting that was done on site at the highway barn. And you can see the highway superintendent at the time, John Furno, going through, and Adam Furno going through all of the concerns with the building. And, walking around the equipment and just seeing how tight things are in there. We have been working with Weston and Sampson to come up with a conceptual design for this project based on some assumptions about the availability of real estate that would be suitable for the development of the project. And I have felt uncomfortable bringing their cost estimates into the public light just yet, because we feel like their project is over-designed and we want to pull it back. And that's a level of sausage making nobody really needs to see just yet. We want to be able to talk publicly about the project and be able to legitimize each and every decision that's made that adds cost to the project one way or the other. We have a number in mind that we think we can recommend to the town for bonded indebtedness on top of what we already have. And based on our debt retirement schedule, we're quite a ways from that. Part of that has to do with the way architectural and engineering firms do these preliminary estimates, right? Everything's worst-case scenario, so they're being conservative on their side, right? They don't want to tell us it's going to cost $10, and then we go to the market and it costs $12, because that's really embarrassing and it stops the project dead. They're going to tell you it costs $14, even though they think it might cost $10. So there is a point, though, once you layer any number of contingency on top of contingency, that it's just starting to get too big. At the same time, there does need to be a recognition on everybody's part that building a building nowadays is an expensive proposition, because you're trying to meet environmental standards, OSHA standards, the price of materials. In any given week, different pieces of a building, the prices are going up and down. There's supply constraints, yada, yada, yada. And then there's just the classic, if you've done a million projects around Massachusetts, we don't care. You didn't do one in Douglas, you're gonna start fresh with us. We're gonna make you go through your paces. And I really don't care what Leicester or Littleton or Lunenburg did. Those models may not apply to Douglas. We have our own budget constraints and our own needs, and we'll build an appropriate building.
We're going to bring forth a great justification for doing this, period.
Yeah.
But I'd be kind of interested, what kind of building are we coming up with here? Who's coming up with, what ideas do they want on this building? I mean, I've built 5 construction buildings, okay? I own 4 of them that I still manage and rent out and everything. I spent my life with heavy equipment and all of that stuff. So I've got kind of a knowledge of things that you need on these type of things. And, what you want and what you absolutely have to have could be 2 different things. I mean, I know that there are definitely the environmental things, you have to have the wash bays and all of that stuff that we're lucky we've gotten away with so far. I'd be interested in, watching this thing from the ground up, not all of a sudden, here comes the plan, and this is what we've got, and it's too late to change your mind.
Right, that's precisely it. And I think all of these things were done on video, so I would encourage people to go see
That was my question.
those
Where?
conversations. So that's on the town's YouTube presence, right? And you're going to look for the Building Facilities Committee.
Building and facilities?
And I want to say, you want to go back to the summer of this year? I want to say it was May or June that we went out there with the full committee.
But what you were looking at is what's there now. We all know that's a dump.
No, but I think the conversation went beyond that. The conversation now includes a list of departmental needs.
Yeah.
And like I say, I think Weston has over-designed a little bit, and we're going to ramp back on that. But I can tell you what the core needs are. We want anything that the taxpayer has bought to be properly stored.
Yeah.
So we don't want to leave equipment, especially that stuff with hydraulic hoses and all the rest of it, outside in the sunshine or exposed to bad weather.
Agreed.
So heavy construction equipment needs to be under a roof. It does not need to be heated excessively. It just needs to be if it's negative 20 outside, it shouldn't be negative 20 inside,
Right.
right? We're going to be reasonable about it. But we don't need to put everything into an ambient temperature of 70 degrees. That's not what we're designing here at
Right.
all. Those things that can be stored either in a cold storage situation or outside, we just need a cover. Don't necessarily need walls around it, don't need to heat the space, but it would be nice to take, maybe the chipper's not the best example, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Snow plows, sander bodies, things that we don't want to fill up with water and keep them from filling up with water, but they don't need anything special treatment. It would be nice, we currently do have a bay that we use to fix things with a lift, and it would be nice to replicate that, and keep that. We don't presently have any workspace for highway workers to do much, whether they're fabricating signs or setting up to do a job. They either do that outside or they have to move the equipment outside so they can do it inside. We have a number of items stored around town in different buildings that the town owns that we'd like to consolidate in a more central location so that we could either rehab or get rid of those older facilities. So the fire station on Cottage Street, for instance, is an example. We've got a fair number of items in there that would be better off in a better location. We also are storing fire equipment, specifically boats, inflatable boats and whatnot, at the fire station. They're in the way, and it's not really a good space
The
ergonomically.
fire station over there, the new
The
fire?
new one.
Yeah, okay.
So there's any number of things that we want to do with it. But in terms of what's it going to look like, not much. I mean, you've heard me say it before. It's Douglas. We're going to build Sherman tanks,
All right.
right? Like the old Timex commercial, keeps a licking, keeps on ticking. That's the stuff we need around here. We don't need anything grand. We don't need cupolas or gable ends or fancy clapboard on the outside or rock or anything else. It just has to work and work for a long time and be easy to maintain, and not be in the state of disrepair that the current highway barn is, where it's not even safe to work inside because of air quality. So that's what we're looking to do. We have myself and the highway superintendent and one of our select board members who has a specific interest in construction industry, and some others that are advising us as we start to get to a conceptual plan. But getting back to the main theme here, because it's a nice transition, one of the things we are going to keep into consideration is the interest rate environment and whether or not it is the appropriate time for the town of Douglas to borrow. I was much more bearish about that a couple months ago before I really fully understood that we do have financial options when interest rates are high. So if town meeting were eventually to be persuaded to go out to bond, we could always sell the bonds and invest the proceeds under state law, under the guidelines of state law, and hold them until we're ready to purchase and start the project. I am very optimistic that our bond rating will improve. I don't know by how much, but we are definitely not a AA3 community anymore. We really should be AA2, and I think we can make a case to be AA1 under those scorecard metrics, just in terms of the overall financial stability of the community and its outlook. We are working on some of our institutional frameworks, so you'll see these things at your own meetings as well as select board meetings, policies that financial advisors recommend municipalities put in place to demonstrate fiscal discipline and a plan for the future that preserves the stability of the town. The other thing that we'll be presenting to the town as part of this conversation is the retirement of debt. So our debt retirement schedule. We had some debt slide off in fiscal '23. We have another note coming up that has a year or two left, and really by 2030, there really isn't anything. So there's borrowing capacity in the near time horizon, and that is a better place to make a borrowing than if you're doing it all at once. Don't do it all at once, in other words. It's just a common thought process.
Matt, the Building and Facilities Committee, do they meet regularly, or the subcommittee talking about the highway building, or?
Both groups meet on a regular basis. Building Facilities meets every month. They're meeting next on the 20th.
And are they the primary committee now for the new
So
highway?
they're the committee that recommended the architecture and engineering firm.
Okay,
The Select Board actually made the procurement, but the recommendation came through Building Facilities. But Building Facilities has been the recipient of the reports of internal working groups that have reported out the needs of the various departments, police, fire, and highway in particular, for space. So internally, and definitely a very public process, although it may not have risen to the level of Finance Committee or Select Board noticing, but we've been laying the framework for this conversation for the better part of almost 2 years now.
how about a major remodel of the fire station? Is there talk of that too? Because their ventilation and all that stuff was problematic, and
So
the
a lot-
doors and so on.
Yeah, in terms of the existing shell of the building, those funds have already been approved, either by town meeting or through the ARPA process.
Okay.
So we have presently plans to do heating, ventilation, air conditioning, electricity, roof at the fire station. That's within the existing footprint. The long, or call it medium-term plan for the town is the way that building was configured and the amount of space that remains on that lot. You don't need a new fire station, you simply, my opinion, it's only my opinion, if you added what you needed to your existing footprint, it would be more cost-effective than thinking about anything else. The remainder of what I prioritize my time on, and we're a little bit far afield here, but is this building, this is a fantastic building, and the town doesn't get much more than 60% of the value of this space out of it, because we have a whole floor upstairs that we don't use for anything other than storage. So before I get off too far into a project to design a police station, my recommendation to the town is that you make sure you utilize this building to its full potential, which may include an ongoing presence by the police, although perhaps on an expanded footprint, before you contemplate doing anything else. Because you just can't count on economic development going forever and residential development going forever. You already have this place, and to the extent that you're not getting your best possible return on investment, having it is something we should address. We should try to get the best we can out of every square inch of this place, because it's a fantastic building in terms of the construction quality, and really it's actually pretty, the classrooms are so big, it's pretty fungible space. We can do things with it that would be cost prohibitive to do in new construction. You could never replicate this thing on today's budget. So getting back to where we are in the budget, I set a cap on what I think we should commit to departments as some amount of that new growth, 1.15 million new growth, minus, so the new growth minus a set aside for real estate purchase. So then we're talking about less than 1.15 million in programmatic change. There are two recommendations, one of which has already been approved by town meeting, so it would be a continuation of existing policy, and that is to staff a paramedic at the fire station 10 hours a day at least, so 70 hours a week during the busiest time, which tends to be the daylight hours, instead of hiring full-time medics. And the reason why that works for the town is that to get the same bang for the buck, you would have to add one person to at least two of the shifts. So you'd be hiring two full-time firefighters, benefited as full-time firefighters. And that would cost, let's say, some figure, close to $170,000, $180,000 a year. You can fill that need with per diem staff who might be easier to attract because they're not making a commitment of 53 hours a week or 56 hours a week on average. They'd be saying, I'm a medic, I'm willing to work 12 hours a week. Kids at home, I got this, I got that. Trying to keep my medic status up, or I might be a full-time firefighter for a different department. And this would be my side gig, right? Full-time in Uxbridge, come over to Douglas, work 8 to 12 hours a week, 10 hours a week, and fill our need for a medic to be on the ambulance. So at fall town meeting, town meeting appropriated the funds to do this exact thing. 70 hours a week for the remainder of this fiscal year, and I will put it in the budget for next year. Because I think that gets us the flexibility we need to maintain an advanced life support ambulance without going to fully staff all those shifts. The second thing I would like to do and recommend strongly is add one new police officer as a second school resource officer. So we've had extensive conversations internally about how to gradually add to the police department in a way so that if the town does continue to grow, you would have the ability to staff the police department up without shocking the taxpayer with, oh my God, we're gonna go out and hire 4 police officers. That's an expensive proposition these days, to go out and hire 4 all at once. We have an immediate need for 1 at the school, so that you have 2 school campuses. It's not ideal, right? Every police chief worth his salt is gonna tell you they would prefer to have 1 SRO for every building. At bigger buildings, maybe you want more than 1. But right now, folks, here in Douglas, we have 1 who handles it all. 2 would be doubling the resources available. During the summer, our school resource officers are part of our regular staff rotation. So they're daytime, they become part of our on-the-road law enforcement assets available to us. So we're not doing 180 days a year with these employees, right? We're doing the full year. So when they're not at the schools, because the schools are closed, they would then be part of our day staff. So there's a win-win there. So adding a police officer 70 hours a week at the fire station, hopefully with people who are not going to be full-time. There is room in the operating budget. This year, we skated a little bit by funding police cruisers in a prior year. So what we did is they were available to us. They were sitting on the lot, and was this free cash?
It was free cash.
It was free cash was used because the police chief said, I can get these right now, and would strike while the iron is hot. So town meeting appropriated that free cash to be used for cruisers, using free cash to buy those 2 cruisers, took them out of the operating budget. So this year, when we did comp reform, one of the things that opened the door to be able to do that was that move, right? It basically put $150,000 worth of operating funds back into the budget. Next year, we have to absorb that. That's got to come back to us because we're not going to use free cash for that. We were blessed to have Chief Miglianico get this break for us, because I was just at a meeting in Uxbridge, and it's through no fault of their own. They did everything they could do, but the Uxbridge Police Department's been waiting for many, many months now to get their cruisers. And they keep getting told, oh, next month, and they still don't have them. We just don't have the luxury to have equipment that's too old to run, sitting in the lot. So we got away with it. The cost of police cruisers is going up dramatically. And it's really aggravating because we can no longer use cages and other pieces inside the car for the next generation. They're all planned obsolescence. You got to buy everything new, and some of those components are getting more and more expensive. We are currently driving the 2 new cars that were bought. One is a standard gas combustion engine, the other is a hybrid. They're checking it out, see what works for them, what they like better. It is not a plug-in hybrid, it's a self-generating, regenerating hybrid car. So the cruisers have to come back. Then I make some assumptions about education. I want to get back to this, but just bear with me, I'll blast through it quickly. That the Douglas Public School would get a 3% year-over-year bottom line increase, which would be the largest increase the department has received since the override, and far larger than any increase the school systems got before the override for many, many years. That's the most fungible number here, because I'm willing to make one commitment and one forecast, right? The commitment I would make is if the rest of the education budget comes in under my assumptions, that the dollars would go to Douglas Public Schools. So I have BVT going up 6% in my budget model. If there's a miracle, if the Red Sea should part and Dr. Fitzpatrick walk across it with all his people, because he's just that good, and he gives us a 4% increase, say, this is crazy talk, but bear with me, the 2% that was in the budget that will not be needed for BVT, I would leave in the budget and just give it to the Douglas Public Schools.
So Matt, real briefly, can you summarize the Hopedale meeting and if that has a realistic effect on our budget? Or was that just people venting and things carry on as normal?
It's not, it's more than that. I mean, the town of Hopedale is where the town of Douglas was in 2018, 2019, at a very high level of frustration. Their own school system is taking a huge, it feels hugely constrained because of the extraordinary growth in the cost of sending the students to BVT. Hopedale, as you know, is a very small system, so they really feel the impact. I did get up to speak at that meeting.
Were you quoted correctly in the newspaper?
I didn't see the story. I don't read my own press.
You weren't quoted very much, but I wondered if it was correct, so.
What I remember saying, since somebody else wrote it down, what I remember saying is that everybody else take a number. We're so overrepresented in this school system that the rest of you crying about us, having 10 students when we have 20, it's just silly, right? We've already been there, done that. I don't know how much more increase BVT could squeeze out of us without actually closing our schools on us at this point. I think enrollment's going to be up this year, but I also think there's going to be, a freshman level enrollment will be up, but I also think you have a pretty substantial class graduating out of the senior level. So I'm hoping, against hope, that we're basically going to be right around the same number of students, and the census is what drives this for us. His bottom line increases 3.5%, 4.5% a year. They're far more than Douglas Public Schools get, but we could live with that. It's when he comes in with, well, I'm going to take 24 more students than I did last year, and by the way, your bill just went up 20%. That's horrific, and we've already been through that. We've already done that piece. I also have the school bus contract going up 5%. I'm told by school department administration that they already have a reliable number to plug in for buses. I'm hoping it's around 5%, but that's what's in my forecast model for right now. In terms of other expenses, we still have pension growing at close to 10% a year, property casualty insurance at 6 or 7% increase year over year, and health insurance at 0. Because this model has been successful, and I anticipate, unfortunately, a little bit of a dust-up in the near future. Hopefully we'll get through it without any issues. I'm going to be adamant that the group maintain its loyalty to the broker consultants that helped us found this thing and that have been doing our renewals and have built the history with us of their underwriting assumptions and their underwriting outcomes. I am not willing to have Douglas or Medway or any of the towns that have done well in this group be subjected to new staff being brought on to replace people who may have left. I want the group to follow the people that built us. That's in a nutshell, is a whole heck of a lot of stupid politics, which should never, ever raise its head in a conversation about a benefit that we provide to employees. But, so what this, I would also like to do is increase the expenses, the expense budgets of our departments. If you recall, last year, we held them to somewhere between 1% and 1.5% increase. And that's not sustainable, right? So we're looking at an inflationary period of the things we buy are just that much more expensive. Our expense budget isn't very high, but we're feeling the impact of some of those, the increase in prices. So I'd like to take some, and I thought I had the number isolated in my analysis here. I'm trying to pick it up real quick, but I don't see it. I've allocated $50,000 across the municipal budget for increases to the expense budget. And it leaves me with just about, just a little bit under 120,000 to settle police and fire. And this will be my last little monologue here. This is tough. Getting people to be police officers, firefighters, and paramedics in the current environment is really, really challenging. And this is a judgment that I've reached, and therefore am recommending to the Select Board and to the Finance Committee a strategy, which is we're going to hang in there. And rather than let our wage profile deteriorate and have us fall to the bottom and just get whoever we can to man our equipment and to fill our shifts, we're going to try to stick with the competition. And there's a couple of reasons why I believe we should do that. One of them is we've reached a point in the pool where we really cannot have stable employment relationships with the level of weakness that's coming out of the pool. Is that enough euphemism for everybody? Do you know what I'm saying?
That works.
And so I just am not comfortable commanding the low position in the salary race because we're just not going to get the kind of people we want to work here. Secondly, the dynamic in the industry, and I'm talking specifically here with ambulance staff, so people work in the private ambulance services as well as municipalities. I don't believe that the private ambulance services have the legs, so to speak, to stand and fight with us for too long. Municipalities can offer a whole bunch of things to employees that private ambulance services cannot. And, you know, it's the opportunity to grow and become a firefighter as well as a medic. There's, you know, frankly, the financial sector looks at us, we can continue to raise our levy 2.5% every year. We have revenue flexibility, whereas private ambulance services make money from their runs. And if the federal government and state government have a mind to reduce the reimbursement rates for ambulance runs, and if you're following this issue, you know they want to cut back on this dramatically at the Medicare and Medicaid level. There's a very powerful group of people who set the rates of reimbursement for various services. And whenever they do this, they have a profound effect on the health industry in general. And so I was a private sector business consultant when CMS decided to reduce the reimbursement rates for respiratory therapy. There were whole companies built in the United States of America on respiratory therapy, and they put oxygen tanks and come to your house and administer your oxygen treatment and charge you a boatload of money, and CMS would pay that. And then all of a sudden they said, yeah, no, we're overpaying. We're going to cut that by about 75%. And you had a number of companies just all went bankrupt at the same time. So I don't like the risk profile that anybody has with CMS kicking around ambulance rates, But I will tell you, one thing for sure, you cannot run a private business on the rates that CMS is contemplating for ambulance reimbursement. It would be almost impossible to buy the equipment.
What does CMS stand for?
Oh, they're the agency that pays for Medicare and Medicaid. It's another federal alphabet soup. I've been calling them CMS for so long. You know,
But don't-
when I was a kid, the reading lessons were CRS. Little cards that were color-coded. No,
But we have to accept their rates too, don't we? On our-
we would, but we're not going to have to close because of it. We're already subsidizing the ambulance service with taxpayer funds.
Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Service.
Thank you.
Okay.
Matt, when do you expect we can see your budget?
Right after Christmas,
Okay,
January.
so I would like.
Your first meeting in January, if it's not too early in January.
Okay, so are you presenting that to us before you present it to Board of Selectmen? I thought that was a yes.
Well, it's a little bit
That was
different.
actually a
It's-
rhetorical question.
It's different this year because we've always decided that we would close books on the budget and present it as a final document when we had all the best information that was available to us.
Sure.
Which typically meant waiting for Maya, in particular, to come forward with our property and casualty insurance rate very, very late in the process.
Yep.
And they usually didn't even give us the renewal. They just said, budget this much and it'll be enough, right? That's the best we could get out of them. So the budget process would languish on into March. This committee would have to rush through its process to get a recommendation in place in time for the flyer to go out by the end of April. We really did have to catch up a little bit. Because this is a different kind of year, this different for a couple of reasons. One, you're talking about how you're going to allocate revenue, which is a different dynamic. In Douglas, for many, many years, the budget process has been, we have limited resources, how are we going to divide this pie that has actually not gotten much bigger than the pie we had last year? This year, the pie is, a little bit bigger. So I want to give time for people to get their heads wrapped around that as the project, right? Because
Us?
you're not, the finance committee and the select board and the school committee, because you're no longer talking about, you're lucky you're getting $10 and don't yell at me if you're getting 9. Now it's, well, I could give you 12 or I could give you 14. It kind of depends on what I give this other department. There are policy choices that need to be made there, so the thing has to roll out faster than it has in the past. That's why like I say, I am prepared to roll it out. What I want to give myself some time to do is have at least a tentative agreement with police and fire, because that's going to lock in a pretty big chunk of this, and proceed from there.
My question is just more straightforward. Are you meeting with us with regard to your proposed budget before BOS?
So going back to what we've done in the past, because we were time constrained, we typically just presented it all at once
I
to
noticed-
everyone.
I noticed that. Well, not quite.
Yeah, I want to do it almost contemporaneously again, just earlier, because I'd like to give both boards ample opportunity to meet with department heads, the finance director, the school committee, and go through in somewhat more detail how it is that they want to use the resources that might be available.
Is there any reason you can't meet with us to do that first before you meet with BOS?
There's no reason I can't.
Okay, can we do that? Okay,
Just, you're going to be mindful of the fact that in the end, they will make a recommendation on the budget that's,
so would we.
yeah,
I hear our job.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
I think it's a
appreciate
matter
that.
of form too, to kind of piggyback on what Howard was saying. If the budget's supposedly the finance committee budget that's brought forward at town meeting, shouldn't it be something that we've kind of set the stage for?
We'd like you to pretend a little more that we have the input in the budget. So can we schedule that meeting?
Well, Matt, I just wonder, when we meet with the department heads, will they, department by department, have been given a number of increase over last year? Highway 3, Police 4, whatever, I mean, will they already have been working on that? So when we have the fire chief in front of us, he already knows how much money he has
No.
to play with? or
Well,
no?
I think,
No.
correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, but I think what Howard and I are talking about is if we can get like a first crack at this, so.
We're
when it-
meeting
when
with
it comes
Matt
off of his
to-
presses.
And then we're telling Matt what to project to the department heads as their
Right.
projected budget. We're working with Matt on what's available and where we want to prioritize things.
Right, kinda
And then
like-
from that, the communication goes out
Yeah.
as to what those department heads.
Because I think
anticipate.
last year, for instance, everybody had 2 to 2.5, right?
There-
And then what we did is we made sure that they were not going above that, so on and so forth.
Well, last year, there was really no choice, right? Because we were going to do comp reform, and that was the whole conversation. We were changing the compensation tables. So once you did that exercise and arrived at, and that really was the select board's purview, in my mind, to set those rates, because it's, the way the special act is written, blah, blah, blah. Couldn't go on and on about governance models, but they have the ability to establish and enforce policy that I have to comply with. So I made my recommendation, but then they voted to change some of those salary levels, actually increase 2 of them, right? Economic Development Director and Building Commissioner. Once that was done, the math was pretty rigorous. There was almost nothing left, so we did a 1 to 1.5% increase in your expense budgets, and that's all you got. And then we came back in November and had to clean some things up.
But you'd agree with switching that order out, you would be able to tell us, well, finance, you're going to have to be prepared that BOS has a little more ability to control, just like Dr. Fitzpatrick. No matter what you guys want to
Yeah.
do, this is the way this is probably going to play back at you. We would like that opportunity to get that first. We would like, and Matt, with all respect to BOS and what you're doing, we would like the ability to have a discussion with you at the first
Yeah.
budget proposal as to why you think our budget should be one way if it turns out 3 days later BOS says, we think the budget should be another way. But we'd like to hear your priorities to this committee.
Yeah, there are only 2 things that are set in stone. The special act specifically directs the town administrator to propose a budget. And the budget that is proposed at town meeting is the finance committee's mark of that budget.
And that's what I think
So-
for good form, right, if we met with you, got a first crack as soon as it comes off your printing press, so to speak, we go through kind of like your monologue, your bullet list of items that
Yeah.
you kind of outlined here. We see how those numbers play out, and then it's, we can collectively set the tenor for.
With
the
your
process
input.
Therefore,
Yeah.
with your input, right.
As to
Because
why-
again, if it's.
Here's where we think we're
Finance
gonna be.
Committee's budget, I think we should be the ones to set the stage instead of saying, okay, well, here's the cards that are dealt from Board of Selectmen. Now we've got to,
I'm going to talk to the town moderator about having the BOS put in our chairs, and we're going to be up on stage this year presenting. So it's our budget. We're going to be presenting the budget. So it's time for us to have you meet with us. We'll prioritize where we think we'd want to be. I'm open to a dual meeting a couple days or a week or 2 later with BOS if they want to propose something different or have us hear out why the Finance Committee's budget proposal should be different, but it should be coming from us. We'd like to meet with you first.
Yeah. I think what I've presented here tonight does, in many ways, represent, I won't call it a consensus because nobody's voted, but my assessment of where a consensus probably is in
Which
terms
would be
of the
great.
staff up, right? So when you hear me say it, I think we need to add an SRO, I think we need to staff up. Those are conversations that have occurred more than once in select board meetings already.
But that's a consensus with them without it. This is the
Yeah.
first we've really seen some of this math.
Yeah.
So why don't we schedule that meeting for when we could meet with Matt after he's able to give us that first flush out of a proposed budget? And I understand that that may not be till you've at least got a comfort level with police and fire. Is that mid-January at this point?
I think we're drafting with the police union now what I believe is going to be a TA at the next meeting of the negotiating teams. Fire might go on a little bit longer, just because they got started later, not because we're having more meetings, just started later. That's where we got, and I would say that the sooner you engage the school department with their budgeting process, the better you're going to be off. Now, I started before, so I said two things, I only did one. I said, if there was overage
Right.
from school bus transportation, there's not going to be overage for Norfolk Aggie, we can usually estimate that with
Yeah.
precision. But BVT, anything that we didn't spend, that we thought we'd spend on them, we'll give to the public schools. Go back to what I said earlier, and I said, I'm being very conservative about the revenue estimate.
Yeah.
There's a couple of reasons why I'm playing this out this way. I don't want to commit a specific sum of funds to the school department for their union negotiations before they've even been invited to sit at the table and even hear proposals from their collective bargaining units.
Fair enough.
Fair enough?
Yeah.
So by not putting any new growth other than the cubes in the revenue budget, there's an intellectually honest way to put money into the budget to cover anything that I don't give them with the 3%.
Or
I'm
not.
talking, or
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
But I'm talking around it
I got
without
it.
trying to actually have to say
Yeah,
it. But
I got it.
I think the headroom for what they might
I
need
got
to
it.
do with their unions will come from the conservatism
Sure.
in this estimate.
Sure.
They are up against some of the same issues that I'm up against, trying to get people to staff positions and comparing contracts to other towns. I don't think that's true on the teacher piece. I do believe it's true on the paras. I've seen the evidence, so I believe it.
I
right?
thought it was everywhere.
It is.
It's,
In the hospitals, it's everywhere. You
Yeah.
can't find people.
I can't find clinicians.
Except the
can't
people
find
he
pacemakers,
earlier
I
used.
Can't find accountants.
The people he earlier used the euphemisms
Yes.
to describe.
yes.
Those people you can find. Can we schedule that meeting?
Well, one other thing
Well,
about,
so I do want to bring this
Yeah.
thought to a conclusion.
okay.
There is a conversation that you guys need to have, and it's just my recommendation, again, just sharing thoughts here. You need to reach a comfort level on how they manage their reserves, okay? Because that will give you a sense of how much you will be willing to negotiate with them around their operating expenses,
They,
the school department's budget.
yeah.
School committee acting as the school department, as the elected body. Because two major philosophical points. One is, Choice In is funded based on the students who are in the system. It's transactional. So it is not like a municipality where you are trying to nurture reserves either through free cash or stabilization or any number of dedicated stabilization accounts, because you're trying to marshal resources for future needs, including a rainy day. You are actually being given a transfer payment
Sure.
because another district's sending their kids here.
Right, right.
The state says, here's some money.
We've talked about that
So don't
forever.
sit on it and let it, it's not bread dough, it's not going to rise, right? You need to cook it and use it.
Sure.
Should you leave enough so that you have enough for a rainy day? Well, yes, that's a fair conversation. The irrefutable fact is that that closing balance has grown on a regular basis. And that being the case, that needs to be balanced,
Which closing balance?
the closing balance in the choice in account. The reserves,
With what?
what?
Their reserve account, year over
Just the
year.
closing balance.
Just the choice in.
Yeah.
Has
I don't look at
increased.
circuit breaker, and I'll tell you,
Yeah,
because
okay,
that's
all
a
right,
completely
okay,
different
all right,
animal.
I got it, okay,
Year and a half lag, a whole bunch of
Okay,
stuff.
yep.
It is still transactional, though.
okay, yep.
It's that balance that the town needs to set with its school department, is how much can we rely upon you to draw your reserves versus how much operating expense increase we want to give you year over year. That is a really delicate balance, and because they're so much bigger than the rest of us, that matters. I can tell you that I don't think we need a 70-30 split to sustain excellence in the Douglas Public Schools every year. There may be some years where it's greater than 70 and many years where it's less than 70. I don't like formulas because they lock you into really bad habits. We should be making decisions based on the facts in front of us. And that's what's led sometimes for me to kind of pull the reins back on this particular budget line item, because I feel like there is opportunity to use other resources, and I've seen it happen. Like, to me, I've watched it happen. Oh, yeah, we're so far short,
Got it, sure.
but we're not short because we used our reserves to close the hole.
Right.
And I didn't do that, right? I'm just
But you
observing
can
it, I'm just
pitch
calling
that.
it out, but I didn't do
You can
it.
pitch all of these angles, all these calculations backward
Yeah.
to us when we've got a physical budget with where you propose each of the numbers to be to fit into a final set of numbers.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll address as finance.
And just to strike the last word on that last topic, and then I truly will shut up, Mr. Chairman. I already have a 3 in here, and there's all the upside potential. So I don't want anything I say tonight to be misconstrued as unnecessarily critical of the school department. I actually think I want to work with them to get them to where they want to be. It's just that there's a burden of proof that needs to be met in front of the finance committee, that
Perfect.
the resources are in place to do what they want to do.
Well, one of the things, doesn't exactly go into what you're saying, but one of the things, in fact, I wrote that down, one of the things that I want to know how I can get the information on is how much are we paying out to school choice to other municipalities?
Choice out?
Choice out. What are we paying choice out? You know, not including BBT or Norfolk Aggie, or I know there's some placements sometimes you have to have for special needs people, not including them, but people who say, you know, I think I'd rather go to Uxbridge or something. I'd like to know how much.
You mean for this fiscal year?
I'd like to know for the last few years going back.
All right, so that's really easy.
Yeah.
That's on our cherry sheet as an
Right.
assessment,
Yeah.
and it's choice out.
Yeah, and then how much do we bring in? And that's
Yeah,
it.
I think to kind of piggyback on what you were saying too, Matt, it would be helpful when we do meet with the school budgeting team to see what do they have in reserves for the past couple of years, and what have they made for withdrawals? To your point, what have they made for withdrawals to fill the gap over the past couple of years? To see, okay, are we sitting on $500,000, we sitting on $700,000, and did we use 50 grand or did we use 200 grand to fill some of these funding gaps?
Yep,
So-
transparency.
Right, just in full transparency, so everybody can see what have you got in the bank, and then what have you utilized in the bank, how much you've been sitting on, or
And for
how
what?
much have you been using.
And for what?
Yeah,
Because I see the way they're talking, it's like they don't think they should have to use any of that money to run their operations, and yet, from the other point of view, everything's being pushed out through the
Right.
department. Just, I'd like to know where we stand on this.
and again, I'm all with you saying, yeah, you don't necessarily use 100% of it, because you do need the oops account, you know, the roof leak in the gymnasium, and we had to redo the floor, or, you know, this happened, and we had to go buy a new freezer for the cafeteria or something. They do need that in there, but how much of that do you need year over year?
So, Matt, when you come to see us, before you see the Board of Selectmen, and you have numbers that you will present, let's say we look at the fire department number, will the fire department people have a chance to look at that? Or is that just a
So I
number,
think this is the question you had started to ask earlier, and the
Yeah.
answer is,
or are you just going to
well, first
pull
of
it
all,
out
I
of
mean,
somewhere?
we're doing the contracts.
Yeah,
So the chiefs participate in the negotiation, so they
Right.
know what they've been allocated in their compensation line, and then I'm going to tell them what they have available to grow their expense line. And that's it. That's all they need to know.
okay.
But Dick, if I may,
You may.
I'm trying to envision a scenario where Matt comes in with his proposed budget on January 10.
Yeah.
And says, this department I've allocated at 10 widgets.
Right.
And we sit around and go through his budget and ask him 60 hours of questions. And at the end, we say, you know what, that budget should be 11. in our proposal.
But do we know it's 11 because of what he says or what the department says, based on their needs?
At the moment, only because of what he says and what we ask. And we propose 11 in an initial circulation of a budget from Matt. And then when the department comes in and sees us and says, we don't need 11, we need 12, then we can reformulate as we head into March. He's just proposing a set of numbers that we always get after the Board of Selectmen's effectively met with Matt and got to those numbers, and that's what the department heads are told, and we're told this is what they're going to get. And we ask, hey, how do you like that number? And they say, well, I guess we got to live with it. You're getting an opportunity to decide whether it should be the 10 that Matt proposes or the 11 you want to propose, and then have them come later and say, I need more than 11. Or you decide somebody only gets 9, and they say, geez, we at least need a 10. I'm asking us to do our
The only
job.
thing is, I'm a tricky guy, so I'm going to give you a balanced budget. So
That's
if you
right.
want that 10 to go to
Yeah,
11, you're going to take the 1 from somebody
Well,
else.
that's the thing.
We're the finance committee. We're those guys
Right, we're gonna
too.
do
Yeah.
the first level
That's the
portion,
point.
if you will.
That's the
Yeah.
whole point. That's why we're asking you to come in early, raw with your proposals, justify them as we have questions.
Yeah.
Then we'll pitch out a set of numbers to the departments based on what the FinCom believes is the reasonable proposal of the budget for this year. We want to submit.
But if Matt is going to propose 10 widgets for the highway department, without asking them or talking to them first,
But I think he's getting their input already on that.
well,
I mean,
that's my question.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, so maybe let's just back up. I may be submitting the budget to you, but it reflects their requests that have already been, we've been through the annual process or almost bi-weekly process of going through their budget to actual, what they spent so far, what's broken, what's not broken, what do they need out of operating. So usually by the time we get to this point in the process, they may want more than I'm able to give them. But what I ask for them is usually based on their input.
The 70 hours for the ambulance, a part-time system, or the extra police person at the school. Those aren't Matt's own personal epiphanies.
No.
Right?
No, they made those
That's right.
presentations. So the select board recently went through a check-in with the departments and asked them what they need. Answer, I'd like to have one more, I'd like to have these many hours. So that's how that's why I'm saying, said earlier, I looked at the reactions of my bosses, right? And my highest level of managers, and I'm trying to find a way to put it all together. And so when I'm trying to balance the growth across the various departments, either my preliminary recommendations are based on what they've asked for.
Because a couple of years ago, you were not real excited about aspirational budgets.
I don't like, when I never will, because that means everybody comes running to the table and says, you got $50 and we want 100. And every time you say I can't have what I asked for, you cut me. It is just such a poisonous and really, quite frankly, foolish way to do a budget process. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
So this is not backpedaling in that direction then?
No.
Okay.
No, there's room to grow here, so the question out was, what's the most responsible thing we can do to improve your service level and the bang for the buck for the taxpayer that fits within a budget that's sustainable over a long period of time?
Ryan, how you doing?
He's sleeping.
He is sleeping. He left.
Well, he was sick, so. All right, any questions for Matt, anybody at this point? So Howard has brought up a date.
I'm still here, by the way.
Oh,
Sure.
Any questions, Ryan, or not? Any questions?
No, you guys have covered just about everything.
Okay. So our January dates are the 12th and the 26th.
23rd?
No.
Am I looking at January here? Oh, sorry, yeah. 9th and the 23rd are the two Tuesdays.
I would propose the 23rd. I think I worked with Lisa on the Board of Selectmen, hoping to have Worcester Regional, the liability for the pension by that time.
Is that doable, Matt, the 23rd of January?
Yeah, 9th is a little too soon.
Is it?
I said a little too soon.
Is the 23rd a little too late? That seems late, because.
The
we're
thing
out
is,
to
for you to be prepared for your meeting on the 23rd,
Right.
I'm really giving it to you, my goal should be to get it to you by the 16th. And that
You
is,
said you've already got it,
Right.
and you're
I
just
said I
waiting.
could, if I had to.
Yeah, fair enough, I know, right?
And then I said I would like to have at least a TA with my union. So I'm trying to give myself, I'm looking at Christmas and New Year's, and I have one union that we're really not
When are-
there yet on the
When are you
numbers.
planning to propose it to BOS?
I haven't set any kind of expectation with the select board.
Okay. When did they meet?
Well, they'd be the first Tuesday of January and the third,
So it'd be the second and the
the
16th.
2nd and the 16th.
Yes, so I'd want to meet on the 9th. I assume you'd have it for them by the 16th?
Well, don't assume, because in years past, they were getting it on March 17th or March 27th.
The 23rd, that's usually our first meeting anyways, because the governor's numbers are going to come out.
What a team.
And like I said, I like to have the pension number. You know, I look for those fixed costs.
But keep in mind, the goal here is to meet just us to fashion where we want to be. And the earlier we can be doing that, to get those numbers back out to departments, I think is useful.
Yeah, I just, again, I think
I'm
this
okay
year,
if it's
this year is
23rd.
different, Mr. Chairman, because if you had a pie that didn't grow much, the precise number from Worcester Regional would matter a great deal because of the rate of increase year over year in that account is set at 9.9 or 10%, because they're trying to get us funded by X date.
Yeah?
That account doesn't create the same kind of pressure this year because you have this new growth coming online. So, right, every single forecasted year in the budget forecast would take into account for the foreseeable future the exact same rate of growth in the retirement system. So all of that's already been thought about, if I will. So if it goes up or down $10,000 or $15,000, so be it. I don't feel a challenge to resolve a 5-digit number with a budget of this size. I just don't think it's challenging. If somebody came in, let's say we had some catastrophic increase in the utilization in health
Sure,
insurance.
sure.
So I had to come back to you with a 6 or a 7 instead of a 0. All right, so that's a conversation.
But you've just made an argument to me to suggest we could meet earlier.
Yeah.
Because the number, even the number you might otherwise wait on, is a relatively minor fluctuation this year that still could be addressed. Whereas in previous years, even a small number would modify everything else. I'll leave it to the chair and to Matt, but, you know, the sooner would be the better to
But if
me.
he hasn't met with all of those unions, and, you know,
But he's
January
downplaying all
6th
those
is pretty,
numbers.
Yeah, it's a-
coming up pretty quick, or January 9th.
Well, I am and I'm not. I mean, first of all, of the 5, I'm on the negotiating team for all 5, but
Right.
2 of them are my responsibility, police and fire.
Right.
The other, the school department is the lead, and I'm just a seat at the table.
Right.
So I don't know if they'll even be at the table by January with
Right.
with their groups. My definition of good faith is rather broad. I would like to at least get to a tentative agreement with both of the municipal unions that I'm negotiating with before publishing a detailed budget,
Very fair.
because we
Right.
often disclose to you to the penny what we are going to pay each individual employee.
And with regard to those 2 events, that's extremely well, fair and a fair point. Your perception is you'd like to have the leeway then between the 9th and the 23rd.
It's also good for me, though, to have a little bit of back pressure, to sit down at the table and say, there are people that are looking for this number on the 23rd of January, can we move along?
Well, I was looking for it on the 9th.
I know you're looking for it out of the night.
How's that for some pressure?
You're doing good with the pressure. I'm just going to push back with the whole Saturnalia, Festivus, Christmas, Kwanzaa thing,
Sure.
right? There's a holiday in the middle that has a tendency to slow us down.
Yep.
We do
23rd?
Saturnalia down in Westport,
Yeah,
maybe?
we do, we will. We have enough deer to be a pagan nation down there, right? We can just run them all over the place.
So if we went for January 23rd, that'd be doable, you think?
That's a very laudable goal. And if something should change, that's over a month from now. If something should change, I can let you know.
Gene, what's your sense of having the departments come before us and so on? Is that something we would do like we've done other years, that kind of thing?
I think it's going to depend on the direction the finance committee takes. I think the 23rd would probably give us more indication about how we want to proceed after that,
Oh, okay.
and
What-
then we can schedule them.
But is your sense, everybody, that through February and March, we'd have the departments come before us
I
and
think we should have.
go through their numbers and so on? Or is it going to be a kind of a done deal already? Well, you want to ask questions of them,
I
Matt,
think it again
right?
depends. I think it depends on what we see on the 23rd, whether there's already been a meeting with BOS at that point, where they are, where we are, whether the priorities and perceptions are different, and whether we've then got to have further meetings to have further analysis as to what we propose that might be different from BOS's.
So wait
proposals.
till after we see what's on the 23rd, how
I
we
think
want to
you're gonna
proceed in
know
February?
two things on the 23rd at the moment. I think you're going to know what BOS's thoughts are by the 23rd, and I think you're going to know what Matt's thoughts are, and then we can have the meeting here to determine what our thoughts are.
So Matt, if we would meet on the 23rd, can you get some stuff to us beforehand to read over, or will we get it all cold from you?
No, getting it cold makes it a wasted meeting.
Right.
So I would try to get it to you.
On SharePoint, or are we moving on from here?
No, I don't want to move on from technology because that is what we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is, I'll continue to do it both ways because not all members are comfortable with it, but there will be a SharePoint set up for the budget for fiscal ~25. Those who have a town email and want to log in that way and view it live, in some cases it can get scary when I'm in there changing numbers and see the, not black, red, black, red, black. But you can see it happening, and for those who want a hard copy or a PDF emailed to them, I can do that on the same
we-
day. It's the same document.
Do we need to meet on January 9th? Gene, is there anything for us to do on the 9th if we didn't have any budget stuff?
No, you will have a reserve fund transfer on the 23rd, though. I will ask that that be put first on the agenda.
But we do not need to meet on the 9th then, huh?
No,
Why don't we keep it open, and then we could decide if we don't want to? Otherwise, you gotta go post it if something comes up, and, I don't know. What do you think of that idea? We never know what's gonna come up.
Well, I don't want to meet, you guys to meet for no reason, but it
Right.
just seems like the 9th, you're already into the year. Even if I only had one tentative agreement, I could at least give you a fiscal impact statement on it.
Well, why don't we keep the 9th?
One tentative agreement? Okay.
Well, we'll keep the 9th
Right?
currently
I mean,
scheduled.
It wouldn't be a waste of
If something
time.
comes
'cause
up, we can.
It would check it off. We wouldn't be loading the agenda on the 23rd with everything.
We'll keep the 9th as
I
a scheduled
understand.
meeting now, okay?
But it could be done.
There's a workflow issue too, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
If something comes up that it doesn't look like there's enough to warrant a meeting, then I'll let
that we
everybody
could
know.
pop to
Yeah.
the 23rd.
I
Sure.
think so.
I envision the 23rd being a longer meeting. Right? And so if it's a 10-minute impact event that we add to the 23rd, I'm okay with it versus all getting together on the 9th,
Yeah.
right? And if you can get your proposed budget all put together by, I don't know, 9, 10 PM on the 16th or maybe on the 17th, that'd be great. You follow that.
You are really subtle sometimes.
That's what my daughter told me earlier today.
You just want to be first on your dance card. that's all.
First on my run card, right?
Right.
Striking the first alarm, Finance
Right.
Committee.
Okay, Okay, so we'll keep the 9th as the scheduled meeting, and if it doesn't look like there's enough to warrant it, I'll let everybody know, and then the 23rd will be our, the big one, so to speak, right?
I may have to go on Zoom for that one,
Well, okay. That's,
bit of practice.
all right, any other questions for Matt, anybody?
Well, I have a question. I don't
Okay,
know
go ahead,
If it's for
Carol.
Matt, but it's something else that I would like to find out how I can get information on. And that was, like, what's the ambulance receipts been for the last few years? And then, and I know that this doesn't work out good because it's, you know, but how much actually was billed? And I know that you might build something and they don't run into the same years. They just want to see the trend, I guess. Like how much we're billing out compared to how much we're actually receiving. But
I do have a schedule that I provided to the Finance Committee back in April that I can update through June 30 that shows the receipt trend for the year.
right.
The receivable list I can give you as of 6:30.
Oh, okay, okay. So do we typically collect like 60% of what we bill out, 80% of what we bill out? I mean, I know that there are people who don't have money and you're not going to collect it, and you're certainly not going to say no. You're just going to have to sit here and die when not taking it
A
off.
couple of things happen.
Yeah,
So if a receivable has aged to the point where we need to pay attention to it,
right,
and we determine that the individual is deceased and had no estate, or they filed the necessary paperwork to plead a hardship,
Yeah.
those come to me, and I authorize writing them off, and I
Right.
send it to the
Right.
treasurer and the town accountant to deal with it, because there's a policy in place for those.
right,
And that comes in fits and starts, because it's a large receivable, so managing it
right,
is challenging. Finding out who has passed on is actually easy, because it's a database inquiry, and then they match it to see what bills we have outstanding. Both things have grown rather significantly, so the amount billed has grown significantly, the amount collected has grown very significantly, I would say, over the last 3 years.
yeah,
A couple of things have happened. The most profound is that our mix has changed. So it's not the number of calls that has risen that rapidly. It's that within those calls, you have different levels of billing. So you have basic life support, BLS, and advanced life support, ALS. And there are things that trigger whether that call is going to be categorized as one or the other.
right,
ALS is typically an intervention where a drug is pushed through into the patient because of a significant condition. There's a couple other things they have to do for it to be an ALS call. BLS is, I hurt my shoulder, we wrap you up, we throw you in the back of the truck, we take you to the ambulance, to the
Right.
emergency room. We've had ALS calls bill at a much higher rate than BLS, and our mix has shifted significantly towards more and more ALS calls. So the people that are calling us are very sick. Okay, so that's what's happening.
right,
We have also been, and I think this was discussed at some great length 3 years ago when we hired the assistant chief, that having that extra person to get ambulance 2 out the door would help us, because we would do fewer mutual aid calls, and we would therefore collect more of our own internal revenue. And then if A2 was available to run to another town, we might get revenue from them.
Right.
I think that has played out to some degree, noticeably.
yeah,
Right, no, it's because it doesn't hockey stick, but it does definitely increase from the time that we hired that person. So it's working out that way.
right,
It's a pretty substantial sum. Again, reserve fund accounting is tricky, because it is absolutely true that we are spending more out of this reserve fund than we ever have in the past.
Yeah.
But the balance is growing every year,
right,
right? Because we're still adding to it at a really significant clip. And that's just the fact of having that reserve balance. You might just keep hitting it pretty hard, but as long as the revenue's coming in,
Right.
it's growing back up to where it was or exceeding that,
Well,
which
you
is
know,
where
it's one
we're
of the
at.
things, you know, people say, oh, we're spending so much money on, you know, the ambulance. Well, first off, they're actually able to do stuff now, so that, I think it's money certainly well spent, but when I say, the way the numbers show, people don't realize that it's not as bad as what it looks, because there's money coming in besides, and that doesn't, you know, but this way here, if we ask about it, then it kind of shows, you know, not only do we have top-notch ambulance services, but it's not costing quite as bad as what it looks like.
No, I mean, you're taking 380 grand out of that every year.
Right, right.
Yeah, at this point, that's the clip we're on. When I first started here, I think it was 6 years ago, more like 325, 270, it wasn't that much. So, you know, you're definitely supplementing that with more. It's costing more, right?
Right, well,
But for those of us who can say this, right? At one point, we put our parents on an ambulance.
right,
And what was it? It was basically a bone bus. We'll get you to the hospital. We may or may not be able to help do much for you on the way.
right,
Now paramedics have 1,000 or more hours of training. They're giving you life-saving drugs.
right,
You know, they're in contact with the emergency room with the readout from your 12 lead. You're better prepared as a patient to go into that ER and get the care you need than you ever were back a generation ago.
Yeah.
So for those folks who haven't interacted with an ambulance service during the healthy period of their life for 20 or 30 years, it may come as a shock, but the people who are dealing with you in the back of that ambulance are highly qualified,
right.
experienced, trained people who are giving you really advanced
Yeah.
service.
So Jean has some figures for you, Carol, if,
Okay,
okay,
Well, I'll send them through you
okay.
and you'll send them on to me?
probably next week.
Yep,
Yeah.
and then the same thing on the choice,
Yeah, you-
choice out?
Choice in, choice out, and ambulance receipts. That's what I wrote down next to your name.
Okay, anything else for Matt? Any other questions?
My only other question was on back to the town highway barn. We've kind of moved to the fact that we have to find a new plot of land, that there's no way to kind of shoehorn some building on the existing site there. I know that there's easements, and a lot of people in town might look at that and go, oh, it's one contiguous plot between the fire and the town barn, but there's a roadway or easement, or whatever you want to call it, up the middle of that. So it's a little misconceiving when you look at it from the street level, but
Yeah.
kind of knowing the plot plan a little bit better.
If you follow the utility poles in
Yeah.
between the two properties, that's actually a steadfast,
Yeah.
immovable easement.
Yeah,
And bear in mind that we're trying to do a whole bunch of stuff that isn't readily visible from the street. So we do have a salt barn now, and you can kind of see it from
Yeah.
the street. But what you can't really see is the condition that it's in. And we have environmental regulations, other things we need to comply with. That design is no longer viable. We would never be allowed to build that today. And those are the things that we have to deal with. When you look at our existing lot there, I mean, it's just not big enough for what we need to do.
Okay, anybody else?
Is there going to be any way to save that existing building and just use it like to put in stuff that just needs not to have rain on it?
The ceilings are actually too low for just about everything we have,
Really?
or that we are contemplate buying.
Yeah,
I'm tempted to say we'd use it as a statuary hall, kind of like at Congress, and we would, you know, Dave Furno and Ernie Marks, and all the, Mike Cahill and Buff Chase, and all their statues there. I don't know that there's a really good practical purpose to keep it. It might be more of a liability.
just check.
Since you know buildings, there's one thing you might want to do, Carol, stop in, walk in and look at the girder, the
Yeah.
main girder that's holding the thing up, and see what you think.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, shall we carry on, everybody? So if you look at our agenda, we have a couple minutes to review, and then I think we've covered most about everything else. So, Matt, you're welcome to sit at the table, or if you want to carry on, you may.
Bear in mind that the bridge I'm taking to get home is falling into the ocean. I'm going to go
Okay.
and see if I can get there before it
Yeah.
falls.
Perfect, good plan.
It's a good plan.
I read,
Back.
the
Thank you
Globe
folks
had a
for your
big
questions.
story on that today. So,
Thanks.
all right, let's look at,
Do you have another set of copies of the minutes?
there are more copies of the minutes somewhere?
I read the minutes, so I don't need a copy.
Mine's all marked up, Howard, so.
I've read it.
Thank you.
So October 10, we didn't approve that because we had a couple things to check, and they've been checked and fixed. So anybody have any more discussion on October 10? Sandy, will you move that we approve?
That we approve the minutes from October 10 as written.
Okay, so motion made by Sandy, seconded by Carol. Thank you, Carol.
Nice, Carol, nice job.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Ryan, did you vote?
I'll abstain, please, I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, so one abstention, Ryan Hogan.
And I'll vote in favor.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. And then November 6th, that was right before the town
Yes,
meeting,
strict.
and then we met again afterwards just to wrap things up. So any questions on November 6th?
Move that we accept the minutes from, yes, Monday, November 6, 2023 is written.
Okay, so Sandy makes the
I'll
motion.
second it.
Carol seconds. Discussion, anybody? Jean?
Yeah, because Ryan's remote, you have to do a roll call vote.
Yeah, who said that rule anyway?
Jean just did.
I'd love to see the footnote on that, because I've heard that, but, all right, so we'll do a vote again on the prior one, October 10. So Howard, you want to start?
On the October 10th minutes, I
Right.
vote to approve them.
Okay.
I approve.
Okay, Dick Vandenberg, aye. Yep.
Carol Gogolinski, aye.
Michael Hutnak, aye.
And Ryan, you
Ryan Hogan,
abstain?
Ryan Hogan abstained.
Okay. All right, now we're on November 6th.
Did you vote?
I did,
Okay.
yeah. So Sandy made the motion,
Okay.
Carol seconded, so
Roll call.
roll call vote.
On November 6th, I'll abstain. Howard D'Amico will
Okay.
abstain.
I vote to approve.
Okay,
Sandy
Dick,
Kuipers?
yeah, Dick Vandenberg, aye.
Carol Gogolinski, aye.
Michael Hutnak, I will abstain.
Okay, Brian?
Ryan Hogan, aye.
Okay, so that carries. All right, I think we've done our general discussion on how to prepare for the upcoming budget process. So basically, January 9 is a tentative meeting. I'll keep you posted. January 23 will be the bigger budget meeting, and then after that, we'll decide how we're going to go through February and March. Is that clear with everybody?
Dick, could I make a suggestion?
Sure, Ryan.
For the meeting on the 23rd, could we maybe invite the school to come in for a high-level discussion? We can talk about the school choice numbers, we can talk about the reserve fund, Dr. Vieira can come in and give his highlights of what he's looking to do over the next year. I still think we would have them in another 4 to 6 weeks later, but maybe get some of the big issues on the table, pretty early.
That's the budget meeting, won't that be too long?
I'd be adamantly opposed to that
Yeah, correct.
Why is that, Howard?
because it's fundamentally in conflict with what we've just been talking about doing on the 23rd,
Right.
which was to hear Matt present his budget
Right.
and his priorities, and us to discuss the priorities
Right.
effectively as a group.
Without-
Nobody else
With
With nobody else there.
to
Yeah.
provide influence or
Right.
input.
Ryan, does that make sense?
If that's the board's wishes, that's fine. I do think the school budget is 70% of our budget, so having them there to prepare, to review what their priorities are might be a good idea, but if the board agrees with me, it agrees with me, disagrees with me.
I don't mind bringing them in on the 9th.
On another meeting.
Yeah, I think the idea is we take a look at it first and then have the other guys in later, right?
Yeah.
Great.
On another
Give
night.
us an ability on the 23rd to have a better idea of where we want to be with a large portion of the budget. I'm okay with that.
So is that everybody's understanding that the 23rd will be just us and Matt, correct?
Right,
Really?
right.
Okay.
That's, right,
Yes,
you
that was
can-
Yeah,
my
I'd like to
impression.
see what Matt's numbers are,
Right.
what Matt's
Right.
thoughts are, and then if we need to do any fine-tune adjustments before we kind of parse it out to the different departments and say, okay, here's your preliminary budget, what do you think.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I think, again, my idea is if this is our budget, I think if there's any year that we want to truly own this, this is the year to do it. To kind of take ownership of it instead of just saying, well, this is the budget that we got presented from Matt, from the Board of Selectmen, and the wishes from the different department heads, and, you know, we're agreeing to or not agreeing to. You know, I think let's set the tenor for this, set the stage ourselves,
Or at least try.
or at least try, yeah.
Right.
And the idea is we'd get the school people in later as needed.
I think so.
Yeah.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah, based on us having a perception of what we think,
It's available.
yeah, in terms of priorities, what he thinks he's got, he wants to make available, and where we'd want to be.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Oh, does that make sense, Ryan?
Sure.
Okay, so I think the idea is we'll get to all the different departments, but after the 23rd. That's kind of the consensus, right,
I
everybody?
think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, anybody else? Anything? All right, motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Sandy moves, we
Second.
adjourn. Do we need a roll call vote on adjournment too, G?
Really?
I would just do it.
Yeah.
All right.
Carol seconds, so roll call vote.
Howard D'Amico, I vote in favor of adjournment.
Sandy Kuipers, in favor of adjournment?
Dick Vandenberg, aye.
Carol Gogolinski in favor of adjournment.
Michael Hutnick in favor of adjournment.
Ryan?
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned at 8:36.